So I don't know what's happening. It's 6:47. I don't know if we want to do like a quick Q&A. We could talk for a minute. Y'all can ask us questions, and then maybe we can like finish it with two poems or a poem or something. I don't know.
That's a dope ass plan. I'm all about that plan. Janelle sent me a little DM that they need a few minutes before they can go because they're amazing partners like in class or something in the same room, you know, COVID life. So I'll start out with some questions for Faye that I had. And I was gonna start with one that was like for both of y'all, but you know, I also got one just for Faye. So I want to talk about like your relationship with form, man. Like there's like you do couplets and shit. You do like these dashes, and you were talking about like the dashes going back and forth. My favorite so far is "Don't Come From My Hood," just because this shit, like this block of text, is so fucking angry. Like to read through it and to have to parse your way through just like makes my blood like fucking boil. Like, and I love how like you were able to convey that through that form. Yeah, and as I've been like reading through this, I've just been like astounded by like the range that you kind of displayed in this book. And I, especially when it comes to the dashes, I'm curious, just kind of, oh yeah, and there's a poem Brunch with those like the prose poem and the flashy stuff. Yo, can you talk about Brunch, maybe the form there? Because I feel like that's the one that like would answer my questions for like how the dashes in the prose and like the space function for like your voice.
Absolutely. So Brunch is actually one of my favorite pieces, and I feel like it's central to this book. And so obviously like I'm a very like spaced out poet in the sense that if you think of like all the other more popular or longer pieces like The Hood Criatura or girl, I'm like forgetting my own book. I'm like, bitch, what? There's the Frida Kahlo piece, The Kind of Woman. So they're like more spaced out because I work with breath and like that gasping that I'm forcing you to breathe in between these statements, in between a sentence, and then like having you like revamp that line with the next one. And that's kind of like my go-to because that's how I feel is more authentic to my brain and my mind and my spirit. So I wanted to convey also that. But with Brunch, like, first of all, like this is where a bitch goes off. Like I feel like this piece is so important. And even though the dashes are there, I still feel like it's congested. It feels like, look, these are all the fucking points I'm trying to hit. These are all the things I'm trying to say, but we're gonna keep it moving. It's gonna be fast paced. And I think that's why I use the dash so much. It helps give a tiny breath, but it keeps the fire going. And I think that's really important. Unlike Don't Come From My Hood, which is like literally like I'm mad at reading that piece because I can't even read it myself. But it's like so jam packed with like how angry I am and like how frustrating it is to like, because I don't know if some of y'all have read it, but that piece specifically is about like this Mexican South gay boy that I know who was criticizing like my relationship to Inglewood and claiming it wasn't a hood because of whatever perception they had of Inglewood. So I was like, hold up, first of all, like we gotta check your own privileges and your own positionality to be claiming something or not. And so that piece is very fiery. There's no pauses, there's no grammar, there's no punctuation, and you just go off. Unlike Brunch, I feel like the dashes help with, there's two things happening. We're having brunch. I think we're there on my birthday. And so my homegirl's like, I'm gonna take you out. We're gonna go have a good time. But the whole time I'm there celebrating my birthday, I'm talking about anti-Blackness. I'm talking about like how people are fucking up and not being mindful of their privileges. So the whole thing is like, you're like, bro, like how are you like eating this waffle right now? Like how are you like why are you like how are you passing the salt and the pepper while you're like pissed off? I think in this case, right, the form works perfectly because of the two things that are happening, the two actions, right? Me deconstructing race, nationality, light-skinnedness, colorism, while also trying to live a mundane existence and highlighting I can't have brunch. I don't have the luxury to just sit and have brunch, even on my birthday. Like I'm working overtime, I'm working all the time because it's a necessary thing. That's part of my revolution. So You know, in this case form, I think also, I mean, here, y'all can look at it. Like you can see the fire, you can see the, like, I'll have a bunch of shit to say and you're just gonna get through it. But yeah, I mean, specifically, you know, with these pieces, that's what it's about.
Yo, that was a dope ass answer. The other question I have for Faye, as we give Janelle a little bit of time. So part of this comes from my own ignorance about the Reiki and Akashic tradition, but I really love your bio, yes, because it gives you, it like shows where your political and like where your like identity lies, where your like the heart of your work lies, working with like these transgender youth and folks like that. And then I love that you mentioned that you also are a practitioner of like these this set of knowledge. And I'm kind of wondering, like, I feel like it's probably in the book way more than I'm picking up on. So for folks who are like new to this jam, or maybe don't even speak to the folks who are new to this jam, maybe just to the few who like are already in the knowledge, what's the relationship between that and this book, the way you wrote it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we go back to form. Obviously, like I'm doing something, I don't know, it's breath. I'm like, for example, I'm thinking The Kind of Woman on page 60. It's a bunch of couplets, but they're broken and stretched out along the whole thing. And I feel like I came to writing as a form of protest. I came to writing as a form of, I want to change the world and I have these set of experiences that need to be talked about because we're conflating a bunch of things. And so here, let me step in and, you know, do this work. Which has to do with healing our peoples, healing our communities, trauma, like sifting, like, so I then developed skills like Reiki and Akashic record readings and stuff like that, so to be able to then give back to my community, to be able to sift through trauma because I went through it. Like, I know how hard it is. Like, if you look at this book as a mirror to me, like, this is like literally me in a nutshell, like in all of my complexities, and it's not easy to get through. It's a little heavy, right? There's talk on immigration, being trans, being non-binary, being displaced, being diasporic, being all these things. And so I feel like, you know, just being able to incorporate or let my spirit, in other words, or let my healing transcend through the work is definitely like why I do what I do. The Kind of Woman is the one that I feel that breaks the veil between me and my spirit work, or makes it more apparent, because I'm having a conversation with Frida Kahlo. So I'm like sitting with her and she's in front of me and we're just literally spirits in a room floating, disintegrating, integrating, remembering. And that's the work I do. I do a lot of mediumship work, channeling work. And so for me, that's like the poem that highlights, right, the connection between the spirit world, which I hang out in a lot. I'm self-employed, and the work that I do is card readings, Reiki, healing work, specifically for Black, Indigenous, POC, queer people. And so, yeah, you know, like I think it also manifests just in the fluidity of the work. I know that like form was something that I struggled with a lot. I think Janelle was someone who was always like, look, try using form in this way to like pull it apart and then, you know, like break free from it. And, you know, I was more fluid, I was more abstract, but I realized, okay, I don't want to be too abstract so that my peoples can get it and find this healthy in between where it can be academized, but it can also be for my people who read it and pick it up and be like, oh shit, like I see myself in it. And yeah, it's like it was a little like experiment for me to try to figure out how to merge these realms. But yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like that gives me like a lot of insight as to like how to keep approaching and rereading these poems, which I'm just falling in love with. Janelle said they ready, so we gonna start out with that question I have for both of y'all, which, and it might be a little bit more of a Janelle question, but I think it's more for both of y'all. Which is, we live in a dystopia right now, like hella, like with climate change, with like all the political shit going on. And yet, for both of your work, especially Janelle, there's this push towards the speculative and push towards the utopic. And I'm curious, yes, about the relationship that has to dystopia and what we're experiencing right now, like what is pushing y'all towards that direction. And the other thing I want to say is, because I feel like it's on the same note, when Faye was saying it was hard to get through their book, I feel like it's definitely like tackles heavy stuff, but there's so much of Faye that just comes out just with like the joy and the like, it's just fun. Like there's like, even when the poems are hard as hell, they're just like fun to like just sink into. Which I think has a relationship to what we're talking about with like this dystopia and utopia. And before I ask more questions, I should just mention, yo, there's people in the room. Y'all can turn off like your mics and then like ask a question. Don't let me hog up all the space. I got a little carried away. So I just had to like put myself in check real quick. But yeah, that's the question.
In terms of my work, I think that one example I'll give is just how I structured my chapbook that's coming out. So the first poem in that book is In Another Life that I read today. I think In Another Life is a poem that looks back at the past and tries to rewrite kind of how history happened, trying to imagine it without war, colonization, etc. But I think that that poem has a foot firmly planted in this very imperfect world, right? And then I think I wanted to kind of set the tone of understanding that that utopia that I envision is also one that is inextricably tied to the world that we live now, right? I could say I don't want no war, but I'm like, do I exist if there was no war? Like, I don't know, right? And so that's the premise of that poem. But I think something that I've also been turning toward, and this is the last poem of my book, it's a poem that envisions a future that is, first of all, right? Because I feel like it's 2020 and I feel like every day I'm like, do we still have an earth? Like, what is, you know, there's so much happening. And I wanted to envision a future where we don't need to think about this. We don't need to talk about all of these systems, right? And that poem is more so invested in just the joy and love of my mom and I saving the world. Like, that's the poem, right? And I think for me, it's been a push to just imagine, like, how do we move through a world with so much pain, and how do we create new ways of giving ourselves the hope and strength to keep moving through it, especially when y'all know things are falling apart left and right. So I think poetry is one way to envision those things.
Thank you, Janel, for that beautiful response. I was recently in a panel and I was like, you know, we were talking about envisioning new worlds, right? Because that was kind of what became central to our conversation as writers of color or as queer, trans people. And I want to be irrelevant. I want to be irrelevant in the sense that I can just be a human being on this earth that does not have to bear the weight of having to be a trans, non-binary, once undocumented immigrant from Inglewood, who is then now doing this important work to highlight how relevant these things are, which should inherently be relevant. It's exhausting. And I think for me, like my push, because, you know, like Willy, I thank you for saying that, like that it's fun, that my work is, because I tend to have such a dark perception of my work. I'm like, this shit is sad. Like, it's tragic. Like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to listen to it. And it's because I feel like I'm constantly reliving all the hurt and the pain through this. But if others can feel joy and light, then I feel like I did my job, right? Because what I'm doing with my work is saying we live in this shit world, and I could be defined by the pessimism of these experiences, and I could like not be non-existent because of the statistics, like people like me. I could be homeless, I could have died, I could have I could have been killed, like, and it's not to take us into that realm right now in this beautiful moment of rethinking about the future, but it's like, I want to bring joy, and I want to bring a whole person into spaces, like not just my hurt and not just my pain. And usually, right, like we have this default setting to fall on the hurt and the heavy and the sad, when I'm like, this is part of the spiritual work too. Like, how do I demonstrate that through my resilience? It's possible, right, to get to the flip side and live through this different lens. Obviously, like, it's not easy. Obviously, like, I'm still feeling like crap. Like, you know, we're still feeling like, you know, Gilead, like Handmaid's Tale or whatever. But, you know, like, I'm still trying to push through and bring light with the work that I do. To be able to have us envision kicking it at the beach, all bringing, you know, snack and counting stars, and we're all just irrelevant in the most relevant way.
I love that so much. A question that I've already asked Faye, that I also want to throw Janel's way, is the relationship to form, specifically with like the sonnets. Like, why the sonnets? Like, of all the forms you could have chosen, I think that's a really peculiar choice, and they're coming out like magically, by the way. Like, wow. Especially hearing them read out loud, that was incredible. And I feel like there's a certain kind of academic bent that like Janel brings to their work, is because of how much of an academic powerhouse they are. Like, Marshall Scholar, doing all this like crazy big shit with research and stuff like that, and like really going places. And I see that like trickle into Janel's work every once in a while. So I'm wondering, like, I guess there's like kind of two prongs to that question. Like, why the sonnets, why the form? But also, does academia have something to do with that? How is that impacting the form? That's my question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Willy. I always say that I think I have a lot of poems that feel like the emotional, poetic version of a lot of my like research, because it's true. I think a lot of, especially a lot of my poems about El Salvador have like field research. Like, I've read everything, you know, like just really going into understanding the context. And a lot of the images in my work are so specific, right? Like, and honestly, unless you've studied Salvadorian literature and culture very extensively, like, a lot of the references would go over one's head. In regards to the Siwanaba poems and the sonnet, I think definitely there's a part of my starting to write sonnets that was like, yeah, I can write sonnets too, right? You know, I think especially in academic creative writing spaces where there is this push to be formal in particular ways. But I think the reason that there's a practical reason and a more like polished political reason for it. I think the practical reason is that the sonnet is just a very useful form, right? Like, it's only 14 lines, 10 syllables each line. Obviously you can break the conventions, but I tend to stick to those rules. And there's a volta naturally built in. So the poem turns after 8 lines. And for me, it's a reminder that every poem should be turning, right? Every poem should start somewhere and we should end somewhere else, right? And I think the sonnet is just helpful for me as someone who also tends to write very long poems, to then say, no, this is gonna be a sonnet, and this poem is just the Siwanaba brushing her hair. Like, that's it, you know? And trying to stay in that moment. And how do we unpack and give more visuals to that and let us stay in it? I think the other thing I think about is that I feel like a lot of the sonnets I read growing up were like Shakespeare, and like there's this tradition of writing love poems, right? Courting poems. But the Siwanaba is a figure who I understand as a survivor of domestic abuse and sexual violence, right? And I think about, okay, well, how much violence has there been in courting and in these processes? And how do I take the sonnet form and then repurpose it in this way? And I think also, like, thinking about them as love poems, I want this sequence eventually to be the Siwanaba learning to love herself, right? To heal and to not just exist as a way of like, yeah, like, you can kill these men that are abusive and messed up, and that's great. But also, like, I want her to like have a good time. Like, I want her to, you know, be free and not have to constantly live in that trauma, right? What does it mean to move beyond that? And so I wanted to have the sonnet kind of allude to all of those traditions, but also say, I'm gonna make this new and make this my own.
That blew my mind. Like, I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that. That was dope. Yo, Nico has a question. Nico, want to hit us up? Camera, mic off, or yeah?
What's up, y'all? So first of all, loved it. This was great. Super, I don't know, feel really full at the moment. So my question is about, Janelle, you said something about how like, had certain things in history, especially like war, violence, not happened, in some theoretical sense, like we don't exist, right? Like, and especially if I think about El Salvador, like a civil war doesn't happen, I literally don't exist because then my dad doesn't flee and come to New York and like the sequence of events that lead to like my existence. And that's like true for like essentially the diaspora, right? So my question for both of you though is like, how has like the creative process, writing, and then just confronting this like sort of reality that none of us are responsible for, right? Especially on a structural level, like we just here, like, you know, like we just show up one day and you're like, yo, what's up? The fuck? Like I didn't ask for this shit. Like how, like, what were some of the things that you identified that helped in engaging with that? Or also like, if you're still like, nah, I'm still in existential angst, like there's nothing that can help. Cause that's my, you know, like if you're that, I mean, I'm there right now cause I'm like going through that bullshit. But what were some of the things that either helped or like you found useful in thinking about it, or how you confronted that like reality for us, especially like diaspora kids, especially like queer diaspora kids, or like folk who aren't cis men, cis het men, and stuff like that. So and the question's for both of you.
You want to go first, Nick?
Girl, not really. I'm gonna cry. Okay, I'm gonna be real blunt with y'all. These past few days have not been cute, and it's because I'm finally realizing I can't live like this. I feel like everything's my responsibility. I feel like I gotta like understand, and like I have a syllabus that I made for myself. This girl is not an academic hoe, and I made a syllabus, and the syllabus has Manifest Destinies, the making of the Mexican American race. It has Inventing Latinos, and this book on trauma and how it's stored in the body. I got through the first chapter of all of these and I was like, I can't, like, I cannot. Like, I feel like I'm not a person. Like I was telling Janelle like earlier, I'm like, girl, like I feel like I'm just a voice. I'm just this ethereal thing, and it's because of this experience. And then I've like pressured myself to like be this leader in this, and not in like in a forced way. It was just kind of like, I'm a writer and I got to do this. And but in just being myself and in putting this work out there, I became this like beacon of hope and inspiration. And I'm like, can a bitch live? Like, can I just be a regular ass, like basic ass hoe? Like, because that's what I want to do right now. Like, I just want to lay down and watch anime. And I feel like it's really hard. Like, literally, I'm 27 years old, and only this week have I been like, I can't keep doing this. Like, I don't know how much of the outright dismantling I can continue doing without falling apart myself. And it's really hard. And so I think things to cope have just been moving authentically, which means checking in with self. Do I want to do A, B, and C? Yes or no? Do I feel like watching TV and just learning about anime or not studying every TV show I watch? Yeah, like like I'm a nerd and I can't like turn my mind off. And you know, the other thing is I'm seeing my therapist for the first time tomorrow, which I'm super hype about. So, you know, that's my honest truth. Like, I'm out here doing all these things, right? Like this NBC News just covered an article on this acting role that I was in a short film, and I'm just like, I don't care. I'm like, can I just hang out? Can I just feel like a whole person? So I just whined for like, I don't know, approximately 3-4 minutes, but thank you for listening. And this is how I cope. The existential crisis of being diasporic.
Thank you for that, Faye, and thank you for the question, Nico. I think it's Yes, it's tough, especially when I feel like I personally am someone who has always taken everything very seriously and has been like, okay, like it's my responsibility to like figure out how to do this, and I have access to these institutions and I have privilege, so I need to use it, right? And like I get very anxious in my head about like, am I maximizing the opportunities that I have? And I think a lot of it is like imposter syndrome, but also kind of, you know, just trying to find my way through these systems. And I think something that a lot of my friends frequently remind me is like, Janelle, like all you have to do is just be. Like if you need to do whatever you need to do, like do it. Like there are so many big structural things that like we're not going to solve overnight. And often I feel that way with poems. Like I'm like, well, like if I write this poem and it's great, the world's still going to be the same. If I write this poem and it's not great, world is still going to be the same, right? Not to discredit the fact that I think poems can bring people together and make people feel seen in ways that are really valuable and important. But I think part of it for me has been kind of taking a step back and saying like, I'm just one small part of, I don't know, the universe, right? And I think the biggest lesson, especially under the pandemic with COVID hitting and all the many hurdles that life has thrown at me, I feel like I have just learned to surrender, right? Like things are going to keep happening. And as much as I want to plan and as much as I want to have control over everything that's happening, life is going to keep happening and it's not going to ask me what I want. Right? And so I think just rolling with the punches and being like, all right, like this is happening. This is what we're doing. I'm making a new decision. Plans change. Cool. Like just having to, yeah, continuously move through that.